So we've heard from business leaders and we've heard from education leaders, and now we're going to check in with one of my favorite political leaders in the state. Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Representative Mike McLane from Powell Butte. In case you don't know, Mike is the minority leader in the Oregon House of Representatives. So Mike, you've heard a lot today already. What are your initial thoughts? Is there something here you could work with? Are these people out of their minds? Or they think they're on track? What is your takeaway?
Well, I enjoy being here. I think this is fun for a lot of us that have to spend those endless hours in committees and really live quite nerdy lives. So to be able to be here and hear same sort of thinking is very confirming. But I think myself and a lot of the other members of the House and Senate are looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and seeing if this framework can be achieved.
Do you have a sense that there is an appetite in the House to have a conversation around the cost drivers?
Well, a year ago, when I spoke here about rural Oregon, I talked about whether there was a concern by the business community, the leaders in business here, or if we all recognized a crisis. That concern versus a crisis is very different. The question really becomes, is this a crisis? And if it is, then Oregon has a rich history of addressing a crisis. We come together, both rural and urban legislators, House, Senate members, Republican, Democrats, tall, ugly, good-looking, we all come together. And we try to solve it. And that's the history. But the question always comes down to whether this is a matter of great concern or is it a crisis. It's been a concern for a while. We've known about these numbers.
Right, we've talked about it for a while.
So is this meeting a declaration of a crisis or not?
What's your sense?
Well, I've been accused of pulling the fire alarm a few times in the House, and I do think it's a crisis. But I think what's going on in rural Oregon is a crisis too, and I haven't seen cohesion around that. So I guess the real question is, what do you all think? Is it a crisis?
You guys want to raise your hands? Are we taking a vote? If it's a concern, this is a deep concern versus a crisis, raise your hand. It's a deep concern. Okay, and if it's a crisis, raise your hand. Okay, that's pretty resounding. Good, thank you. So would you put some meat on the bones of, you say it's a crisis in rural Oregon, in your community. Can you tell me what that looks like if we don't try to solve this in a more meaningful way? How does it play out?
By this, you mean
the fiscal crisis?
Well, clearly we have people that have become very reliant on government services. And the question becomes whether there can be a withdrawal to more independence that is without symptomatic aversion. And so I look at it to say that in rural Oregon, we continue to have a robust community which helps each other. And when I hear some of my colleagues talk about reduction in spending, the premise that goes unsaid is that they don't have a community that will help each other. That if the government doesn't provide a service, then no service will be rendered. And that's a fundamental difference between rural and urban Oregon. Is I think there's just more confidence in rural Oregon that we'll buckle up and take care of our friends. And so that premise, I think, needs to be spoken to by more urban legislators. But I do think it's something we need to acknowledge, that if there is cost reduction, the juxtaposition that often occurs is, if you reduce this program, then you hate these people.
Right. Right.
And that's a false premise. But yet, to create a bargain, you have to be able to mutually honor each other in these decisions as opposed to politicize it. And sometimes rural legislators don't equate a reduction in spending as simply a disaffirmation of value to the individual who receives the service. Look, we do a lot. I mean, our cost in this state per capita on government spending has accelerated at a tremendous pace. And when we equate state spending to legitimacy of value, we're never going to get there.
Yeah, because you have to look at what's the outcome the spending is resulting in, and is it the outcome that you're desired? You said in your first comments that it was affirming to hear thinking that aligned with your own or with that of your colleagues. Can you say more about what resonated or what lined up for you?
There were three parts to a stool,
Mm-hmm.
and if you want to basically create a system by which our state revenue, our state government, the services that are so important can stand, it really needs those three parts. We need to have spending reform. We need to have regulatory reform, in essence, or an acknowledgement we're not going to interfere in the growth of our business within the priorities that we all value. And then, of course, revenue reform. And as a leader of the minority party, I respect the voters, and they did not put me in charge as much as I tried to convince them. And we've got real smart people like Cliff Bentz and Mark Johnson, Newt Bueller, others that are going to be at the forefront of sitting at the table and working through these things. But I think we all agree that it takes three parts. But the first two parts, in essence, the spending reform and the commitment to business growth within the framework of statutory and regulatory reform, those really have to come from the majority party. They were put in charge. I mean, Kate Brown, Tina Kotek, Peter Courtney, they have to be willing to do that. And when we come together in a room, that has to be legitimate. Our side will be legitimate. And hopefully we can replicate what's been done in the past during a crisis.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, always good talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.